now obtained the first excerpts of a House panel's memo that reportedly reveals surveillance abuses at the highest reaches of the FBI and DOJ. That memo has not been released, but Fox News has exclusive first excerpts from it. The House is approving for it to be made public, and we are told that there are no redactions in this. That is big news in itself. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with the very latest. Catherine?
Well, thanks, Harris. In the last few minutes, Fox News has been able to confirm that the 4-page memo has now been declassified, and that letter was sent from the White House to that effect. That means for folks at home, it will be posted on the House Intelligence Committee's website, probably in fairly short order, so that everyone can read it. Based on our reporting and intelligence gathering here at Fox News, we understand that there are a number of significant headlines in the memo. What we understand is that a senior law enforcement official testified during a closed, classified session to this House committee that without the dossier, this is the dossier that was funded by the DNC and Clinton campaign and compiled by Fusion GPS, the opposition research firm, they would not have been able to obtain at least one surveillance warrant for a member of the Trump campaign. Number two, we also understand that the FBI and Justice Department relied in part on media reporting to lend credibility to the dossier when they made applications to the National Security Court or the FISA court for these warrants. What's key is, as we've shown through our ongoing reporting here at Fox News, the Fusion GPS and the British spy who gathered the research were part of an active campaign to brief major American media outlets. So the thing to look for in this memo is whether you've got some of the same media organizations that were briefed on the dossier, their reporting being used to lend credibility to the dossier. Okay, so that's what they call circular reporting in intelligence circles. We also understand that after Christopher Steele, the British spy, his contact was broken off with the FBI, that he was able to continue to provide information to the Bureau, along with the company that was paying him, Fusion GPS, through Bruce Orr. This is the Justice Department official who was demoted after it came to light that he had a number of undisclosed meetings with Fusion GPS and Steele. Harris.
Right, Catherine, we will come back to you as the news warrants, but we want to right now go to the Oval Office where the president is meeting with defectors of North Korea. 6 of them live in South Korea now, and he's invited them to come to the White House. 2 of them live in the United States. And among his comments now, in a rather provocative action to highlight human rights violations in North Korea and put pressure on North Korea, as you know, because of their nuclear weaponry and all of that they're trying to develop. In order to do that, he's invited these defectors to the White House. But the topic of this important surveillance memo has come up in his time in the Oval Office, and that's what we want to show you. Let's watch together.
Thank you. I think it's terrible. You want to know the truth? I think it's a disgrace. What's going on in this country, I think it's a disgrace. The memo was sent to Congress. It was declassified. Congress will do whatever they're going to do. But I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country. And when you look at that, and you see that, and so many other things, what's going on, a lot of people should be ashamed of themselves, and much worse than that. So I sent it over to Congress. They will do what they're going to do. Whatever they do is fine. It was declassified. And let's see what happens. But a lot of people should be ashamed. Thank you very much.
Are you not concerned that the FBI doesn't want the memo out?
Thank you very much.
Does it make you more likely to fire Rosenstein? Do you still have confidence in him after reading the memo?
You figure that one out.
We haven't seen it yet, though.
I don't think so. These are just great people that have suffered incredibly. There were many, many others like them that have suffered so much. And they were here, and I said, let's tell you a story very quickly. We have others in a different room, as I told you, that are really petrified to be here. Petrified. So it's tough stuff. It's tough stuff.
President, do you believe there's more that the United States can do to help North Korean defectors?
Well, we're doing a lot. We've done more than, I mean, we have many administrations that should have acted on this a long time ago. When when it wasn't at this kind of when we weren't in this kind of a position. You know, we ran out of road. You know the expression. The road really ended. They could have done it 12 years ago. They could have done it 20 years ago. They could have done it 4 years ago and 2 years ago. We have no road left. So we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, we'll get through the Olympics, and maybe something good can come out of the Olympics. Who knows? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Do you still have confidence in the Rosenstein winner?
Thank you very much, everybody. I better not get involved.
So you see the president there, the last of it, talking about relations with North Korea. He says, we have run out of road. Let's see where we are after the Olympics. But that bombshell memo, as some would term it, that is now about to go public, Fox News has obtained exclusive excerpts from that, and we've been reporting that through our correspondents here. The president saying a lot of people should be ashamed. Let's go right away to Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts, who's live, obviously, in front of the White House. John?
And Harris just got off a conference call with intelligence officials who were walking reporters through the contents of the memo. And one of the real headlines here is you heard Catherine Herridge talking about a high-ranking official who testified that without that dodgy dossier, the unverified dossier compiled by Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele, there would have been no hope for a FISA memo. That official, according to the memo, who provided that testimony was none other than the deputy director of the FBI, the former deputy director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, who resigned suddenly on Monday after the FBI director, Christopher Wray, had a chance to read that memo on Capitol Hill on Sunday night. Not connecting any dots here, just pointing out that those are the dots. Now, the president clearly is unhappy with what he read in the memo. He said that he thinks it's a disgrace. People should be ashamed of themselves. He went further in a tweet this morning expressing his displeasure with certain members of the FBI, certainly not the rank and file, tweeting out, quote, the top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department have politicized the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats and against Republicans, something which would have been unthinkable just a short time ago. Rank and file are great people. What the president has been saying about this memo and that tweet drew a sharp response from the former FBI director James Comey. Let's put up what Comey tweeted earlier. All should appreciate the FBI speaking up. I wish more of our leaders would, but take heart. American history shows that in the long run, weasels and liars never hold the field. So long as good people stand up, not a lot of schools or streets named for Joe McCarthy. So the feud between the White House, the Republican leadership in the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and the former FBI director continues apace, getting fairly visceral there. I mean, no wonder, because James Comey, a fierce defender of the men and women at the FBI. But this memo that has been released, and we'll get a chance to read through the actual text very soon, Harris, certainly illuminating that in the eyes of the people who wrote this memo, and that would be Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and Trey Gowdy, who's the chairman of the Government Oversight Committee. There were some bad actors at the FBI, and that the information that led to the FISA warrants against certain individuals in the Trump campaign was based on information that perhaps ordinarily would not have warranted a FISA court issuing those warrants. Harris?
Yeah, John Harwood, this is Melissa. Sorry, John Roberts. This is Melissa Francis. Let me ask you quickly. What happens now? I mean, when you look at these charges and what's in here, it is at least everything that everyone expected and anticipated. It's not, you know, nothing that we had heard others trying to deflect, that it was going to come out and fall flat. What happens now?
It's unclear. You know, when the existence of this memo was first made public, people were suggesting that it may be the undoing of the entire special counsel investigation. I don't necessarily know that that will happen. Certainly, Andrew McCabe is no longer with the FBI. And again, we've just had some excerpts here that were given to us. We haven't had a chance to read the full memo in context, so it might be a little early to make predictions about what will happen. But certainly, one thing that you can be assured of that will happen, this will be a topic of broad discussion and accusations flying back and forth across the partisan aisle for the next few days, if not longer than that, Melissa.
Yeah.
Okay, John, I'm going to jump back in. We obviously are sitting here together, so we may toggle a little bit. And we have Howard Kurtz on the couch for us. We've got Jessica Tarlov and Lisa Booth, so we may get to talk with you one-on-one in different instances. But I want to ask you about this. So there are quotes from the memo, these excerpts that Fox News has exclusively obtained ahead of the release of this memo. And one of them has Christopher Steele, that British spy, admitting to Bruce Orr, the employee at the DOJ that now has come down a couple rungs as they have punished him in some way for having maybe some undisclosed relationship with possibly the company that put together that anti-Trump dossier because his wife worked there.
It's not an undisclosed relationship. His wife Nellie worked for Fusion GPS during that time.
Steele admitted to Orr his feelings against candidate Trump in September of 2016, when Steele told Orr that he, Steele, was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being president. Again, that's a quote from the memo, from the excerpts that Fox News has obtained exclusively. You're reporting on this.
And again, I mean, this feeds into the whole narrative, which is the crux of this memo, that it was spurious and specious information that led to the granting of those FISA warrants to begin with. You heard Catherine Herridge reporting a short time ago that Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS briefed some reporters on the contents of the dossier, which she referred to as circular reporting. Sources in the intelligence area have said to me that what they did was they've been a little more forthright about this. Not forthright, but they've been a little more strident about it, let's say, to say that what happened was that Christopher Steele ginned up a fake news story in order to sell the credibility of that dossier, which was then taken by the FBI to the FISA court and used to obtain warrants for surveillance of Trump campaign officials. So, it's being seen in very sharp terms here that it's being portrayed in this memo that this whole thing was ginned up as a way to get at the Trump campaign. I mean, that's the strongest way to put it, what's coming out of the memo. Now, people could see it different ways. Obviously, Democrats are saying this was written by two Republicans. Of course, it's going to be bad. But we haven't even had a chance to read the full memo yet, nor has the American public. So we don't want to cast certainly any judgments on it. You don't want to do that as a journalist. But we can't go too far beyond what we're saying right now. But basically, I'm just being told that what happened with this, the FISA court and the application of the FISA court was based on false information and should never have happened. So we'll see where it goes from here.
John, Howard Kurtz here. I mean, obviously, the import of this is that it raises questions about the roots of the Russia investigation, which the Trump administration has been trying very hard to discredit. The dossier was always considered by mainstream media organizations, most of them, not including BuzzFeed, to be uncorroborated and unverified. But since there's been such a huge partisan struggle over the release of this Devin Nunes memo, he, of course, the Republican chairman of the House Intel Committee, isn't there likely to be a pretty strong counterattack from Democrats whose own counter memo has not been able to be released, according to the committee vote, and they're going to say that this is cherry picking and that it has a lot of omissions in it?
Well, the reason why the Democratic memo hasn't been released, Howie, is because the Democrats have not asked for the memo to be released. It didn't go through the same process that the Republican memo did. It's got to go through a vetting process. It's got to go through a vote process. It's got to come here to the White House because it contains classified information. It was asked at a breakfast with the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, on Tuesday morning, well, why don't you just release the Democratic memo at the same time? And Speaker Ryan made all those points that you want us to release this memo without it going through the same process that everybody demanded of the Republican memo. That just wouldn't be protocol. So if the Democrats want that memo out, it's a very simple process to go through, Howie, and they could go through exactly the same thing that Nunes and Gowdy did to get their memo out. But certainly, you're going to hear a lot from Democrats that this thing shouldn't have come out, that it's a slam against the FBI. It's in violation of national security and intelligence protection protocols. But we've heard all that already. So all we need to, what we're hoping to do right now in the immediate is to read this darn thing.
John, real quickly, and we're going to kind of toggle between you and Catherine, but before you go for right now, what do we know about this Democratic memo? Do we know the length of it or anything?
I know nothing about it.
That's a good question.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, John, we'll come back. Thank you very much. Now, let's go back to Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge. So you heard me reading that excerpt, Catherine, and I hope I didn't force you to put your cup of coffee down because it's your work and your writing. But John and I were just talking about it, John Roberts, about Steele admitting to that DOJ employee, Bruce Orr, that he had some pretty strong feelings about candidate Trump becoming president.
So there are two key players that really matter to this part of the memo. There's this former British spy, Christopher Steele. He was the one who was tasked to gather the research for the Trump dossier. And then this Justice Department official, Bruce Orr. And based on our reporting, at a certain point, the FBI cut off their contact with Christopher Steele. And after that, Steele continued to provide information to the FBI through an indirect channel, which was Bruce Orr. And we've got a quote from the 4-page memo that has just been declassified. And what it states, Steele admitted to Orr his feelings against then-candidate Trump in September of 2016, when Steele told Orr that he, Steele, was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being president. So that information goes to the idea that Steele had a political agenda when he was gathering this information for Fusion GPS, and they were being bankrolled by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. And if I could, I do know a little bit about the Democrats' version of the memo. I know you were just asking John about that. So the Democrats' version is 10 pages. And their argument all along has been that the Republican drafted memo is inaccurate because key facts are left out. So what I anticipate in the Democrats' memo is that it's more fulsome, perhaps in its reporting, to make the argument that the Republican version, which is about half the length, is not a full picture of what actually happened. And if I could just make one final point. Most Americans aren't familiar with this FISA court. This is a national security court. It's the most secret court in the entire United States, and I would argue it's really sort of on a plane with the Supreme Court, because these justices have to make decisions about whether the U.S. government is allowed to surveil Americans inside the United States. And some of my contacts who've had cases where there are surveillance warrants with their clients tell me that the threshold in these courts to sign off on the surveillance of an American inside this country is like this. It's extremely high. And even before we learned information today about the dossier, they said to me, if opposition research was used in any way to obtain a surveillance warrant from this court, and the court did not know who was bankrolling that information, because that goes to the credibility, and they didn't know it was also being shared with the memo, that goes to the credibility, then whoever put in that application has a really big problem, because this is not the standard that the FISA court operates at.
Hi, Catherine. It's Lisa Booth. So as we're learning more about the way the FISA warrant was obtained, also the briefing of reporters, how central, in your estimation, is the dossier in the entirety of the Russia investigation itself?
I think I want to kind of reserve my thoughts on that until I've read the entire memo. But based on the information we've been able to learn so far, it played a role in part in obtaining a warrant, and that then FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe testified behind closed doors to the House Intelligence Committee that if they didn't have the dossier, they would not have been able to secure at least one warrant. I don't know if it applies in other situations. And what also has my attention is that in the fall of 2016, Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele were busy briefing major American media organizations about the dossier. The vast majority did not run with it, but some reports were made. But it was an effort to sort of seed a storyline, if you will, right? Right. At the same time that the information was being provided to the FBI. And I was reporting last hour, people on the committee tell me that the FBI and Justice Department say they knew the dossier was funded by the DNC and Clinton campaign, but they can't say exactly when they knew that. And that's extremely important, because if they knew this before the application for a surveillance warrant to this national security court, then whose decision was it to withhold that information or not give the National Security Court the full picture before they made that kind of awesome decision to grant surveillance on American citizen inside of this country?
Catherine, this is Melissa. Let me ask you, you made the distinction that this was used to gain at least one FISA warrant. Do we know how many there were in total? And are the Democrats going to then come back and say, well, it was only that one, they wouldn't have got it without it, and we didn't get that much from that one warrant, but they got all these other warrants based on good information, so who cares?
That's a great line of questioning, and I just don't have a good answer to that yet, so I'd rather not speculate. I'd rather see if the memo speaks of one or more surveillance warrants, and then what the rebuttal is from the Democrats, because, right now we seem to have one side of the story, right? What's in the Republican drafted memo, but we need to see how Democrats respond and how they make the argument that the memo is misleading because certain information is absent.
Catherine, it's Harris back again. I was taking notes on what you said about the Democrat memo kind of being the answer back to criticism that some, in their estimation, Democrats, key facts were left out in the Republican memo. So I'm curious because a lot of our reporting has pointed to the fact that Democrats were taking exception to the original GOP memo not being full enough, not having enough in it, but they wanted redactions. They wanted things taken out. Can you talk to me about what the redactive process has been for this GOP memo per what we've been able to learn?
Well, Harris, this is a process. We've never really been down this road before, and so it's been difficult for all parties involved to navigate, not only on Capitol Hill, but also for reporters, because no one can really point to any particular precedent. Under these House rules, the Intelligence Committee voted, and with a majority vote, they were able to make this memo that they had drafted available to everyone in the House. The Democrats came up with their own version, which they wanted to make available to everyone in the House. But according to these long-standing rules, they would need a majority to do that, and they are in the minority on the committee, so they were not able to move forward. Okay, our reporting is that the Democrats did ask for an edit, as did the FBI, or a redaction. But everything that we understand is that it was relatively minor. And the reason that is based on our reporting. This memo was drafted in a way with the anticipation that it would ultimately be made public, right? So it was very deliberate in its efforts to not discuss sources and methods.
Interesting.
Right, okay, so
I get you.
It was designed to be public with the idea that it would not be revealing sensitive information.
All right. And Catherine, in just the last few seconds, we have learned that the memo is fully out.
Oh, good.
I know that you had, yes. And so now you can probably share with us everything else that you've got. I see you motioning over. Maybe they're going to hand it to you right now.
Yeah, I think so. Do you have it right now?
Catherine, let's.
Yeah.
Okay, she's going to take a quick peek.
Yeah,
we're going to keep you on screen, but we're going to talk amongst
right.
ourselves. So, Howard Kurtz, you had some interesting questions because you said certain things will happen when this memo comes out. What?
Well, obviously there'll be a Democratic counterattack, which will say this is not the whole picture. But here's how it's changed our understanding. So we can now say that not only this
hold on a second. Let's cut Catherine's mic so she can have a private conversation.
You're seeing real reporting in action. Okay, we can now say
our reporting being done right here.
That the roots of the Russian investigation, as reflected in this FISA warrant, were one, with the Oppo research from Fusion GPS hired by the Democrats, and two, Christopher Steele, not just an ex-British spy, but a guy who we now know was desperate, in his words, to stop the election of Donald Trump. At the same time, I just want to point out the Robert Mueller investigation has seemingly, from the reporting we have, moved a bit away from the whole Russian collusion question to questions of obstruction of justice. So even if everything in this Devin Nunes memo is true, it doesn't necessarily undercut what Mueller is doing right now.
That's interesting. Okay, so for people who are just joining us and they have heard us for days talking about the White House having 5 business days up until what would have been on Monday to declassify the contents of a House intelligence memo and the potential release of that. That memo just seconds ago has been released and it is made public. Our lead intelligence correspondent on the job on this is Catherine Herod. She is now, you saw her on the phone moments ago. She was talking already. We cut her mic. She's working on getting through. Now, remember, it's less than 4 pages. So she's working on going through and making her notes that she had made by the Fox News exclusive excerpts that we had in the last hour, side by side with the full release of the memo. We've talked a lot about the Democratic response. We have a Democrat on the couch. Let's get some. Jessica?
Well, I haven't read the memo. I have it in my email, but I haven't gone through it. Like Howie was saying, and like Catherine was saying as well, there will be a Democrat response. Their memo is more than double the length of Devin Nunes's memo, so there's going to be a lot more in there, obviously. I'd love to hear why they wanted names redacted, what exactly the omissions were, and I'm also curious to see if the FBI will release their own document, because they objected to the release of this in the first place, and they said that it would be extremely damaging. So there has been speculation that perhaps Christopher Wray will release a statement of his own, clarifying what's gone on here. But I think everyone will be watching Rod Rosenstein now, because that is said to be Trump's target, because he wants him removed, because he's the only one who can fire Bob Mueller. So those are the moving pieces here.
Okay, but if you're President Trump, you have every right to be deeply concerned about all of this. You essentially have a Democrat opposition research piece at the heart of the Russia investigation, as well as likely the public narrative shaped around that. Meanwhile, you also have the Obama administration unmasking his team's name, making it easier for the intelligence community to share information across agencies. So, of course, President Trump is deeply concerned. And then he's told by James Comey 3 separate times he's not under investigation. As Howie said, now it looks like it's the obstruction of justice aspect that Robert Mueller's looking at.
And also the money laundering and all of that.
He forced a special counsel investigation after he was fired. So if you're President Trump, how do you not collectively look at all of those things and say, what in the heck is going on here?
I have never said that President Trump doesn't have a reason to be concerned and that we shouldn't be looking into all of these moving pieces. But we keep ignoring the fact that Carter Page, who was the person that was being surveilled, they're making the argument that the FISA warrant was suspended. It started in 2013. This didn't start when President Trump was...
I am going to step in here because I'm sure you can open the memo on your phone by now. Yeah. Dear Mr. Chairman, so I'm going to read a little bit of this. The White House, the Honorable Devin Nunes, this was the White House memo. Dear Mr. Chairman, on January 29th, 2018, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence voted to disclose publicly a memorandum, and it just talks a little bit about that. The President understands that the protection of our national security represents his highest obligation. Accordingly, he has directed lawyers and national security staff to assess this, and now it is out. So we are all clicking on this very popular PDF right now, trying to get it open. But I just wanted to kind of get in there and get some of the language that they would have heard from the White House. Go ahead, Jessica.
I'll finish. So Carter Page was on their radar from 2013. He didn't work for now President Trump in 2013. So this started well before that. And we know that what kind of characters Carter Page were, just like Paul Manafort and Rick Gates and the like. So I have never said that President Trump doesn't have a reason to be concerned. I have never said that any of this is rooted in invalid questions. What I am saying is that there appears to be movement on the part of the GOP, the Republicans, who have always billed themselves as the top defenders of law enforcement, to undermine the FBI and the DOJ because of the Bob Mueller special counsel investigation.
But you're forgetting the fact that Congress is also an investigative body, and they have oversight authority here. And if you have people at the FBI or the DOJ abusing their authority, particularly for political partisan reasons, that should be deeply concerning to you,
of course it is,
as well as every American who is watching this show right now.
And it happens on both sides.
We're going to step in again. Melissa, do you want to tag team this? I'm going to go ahead. We've got the unclassified memo now. And this is to majority members of the House Intel. So Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act abuses at the Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation is the subject matter of the memo. The purpose: this memorandum provides members an update on significant facts relating to the committee's ongoing investigation into the Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation and their use of Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, during the 2016 presidential election. You want to go ahead and jump to the investigation?
What we're going to do is we're going to go to Catherine Herod. Is that right? That's what they just told me. Do we want to bring Catherine back in, or you want us to do more of this?
Good.
Okay, go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, so I'm through the first couple of pages of the memo, and what they indicate is that the focus is on the FISA application for Carter Page. Carter Page was a one-time foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, and it states that then FBI Director James Comey signed 3 FISA applications, on behalf of the FBI, as well as Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who was removed earlier this week, Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates. She's the one who sort of famously sounded the alarm about Mike Flynn, and she felt there was a basis for him to be blackmailed by the Russians, as well as then acting Deputy Attorney General Dana Buente and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. The key finding here, it says, our findings indicate that as described below, material and relevant information was omitted. And I'm going to continue here. Neither the initial application in October 2016, so this is the surveillance application, nor any of the renewals disclose or reference the role of the DNC, Clinton campaign, or any party or campaign in funding the efforts of the British spy Christopher Steele, even though the political origins of the Steele dossier was then known to senior FBI and Justice Department officials. So the memo was stating that when they went to get these surveillance warrants from the FISA court, they said, this is information we have from the dossier, but they didn't give the National Security Court full visibility on who was financing the dossier, who was sort of the driving force behind this opposition research. And the memo states that this was known to the FBI and Justice Department, but it was still not provided. That's a significant headline right there. And just one other, if I could. It states that the Carter Page FISA application, so a surveillance application, extensively cited a September 23, 2016 Yahoo News article by Michael Isikoff. And it focused on Page's July 2016 trip to Moscow. Okay. I want to check the British court records, but Yahoo News was definitely one of the 5 or 6 American media outlets that were briefed by Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson about the dossier. So you potentially have a situation here where the Michael Isikoff article is used to provide credibility for the reliability of the dossier, when in fact it was the people behind the dossier who briefed Isikoff, who wrote a story that then came back to the FISA court. That's called circular reporting. That is not called credible sourcing.
Wow.
Hey,
Catherine,
can I ask Catherine something?
Yeah.
Catherine, so I'm looking through these documents, and what we see down around number 2, they're talking about Steele, like you said, admitting that he gave information to Yahoo News and that his numerous encounters with media violated the cardinal rule of source handling, maintaining confidentiality. So he had become at that point less than a reliable source to the FBI. He was at that point terminated, but then he began still going back and meeting with Associate Deputy Attorney General Bruce Orr.
Bruce Orr, that's correct.
Senior official of the DOJ. And then that's when in September 2016, Steele admitted to Orr his feelings against then Trump candidate when Steele said he was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about not being president. So they knew his motivation. He had already been fired for doing things he wasn't allowed to do. But at that point, he tunneled back to Bruce Orr and passed more information in. And all this was known. And the information was used to obtain FISA warrants anyway. That's the gist of this section of it.
Yeah,
which
and it brings up the one question that Catherine, I don't know that this would be able to answer, and that is why in the world would they do that?
Pardon me, Harris, just repeat that.
Why? Why would they lean on this if this were coming from someone that they had already determined needed to be relieved of his duties?
That's not a question I can answer.
That's not something that we can answer. That's what I'm saying. Does the memo approach it?
There's another important headline here. It states in Section 4, according to the head of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. Counterintelligence Division is the division that's in charge of rooting out spies and espionage. Assistant Director Bill Priestap, this is someone who was part of Comey's inner circle. He said corroboration of the Steele dossier was in its infancy at the time of the initial Page FISA application. So what that's saying there is that it was not a fully vetted document at the time it was used to get a surveillance warrant on an American citizen.
Howard?
2 points that jump out at me, Harris, as we go through the memo all together on live television. As Steele was having these media,
how it goes sometimes.
These media contacts with Yahoo and others, this memo says flatly, Steele improperly concealed from and lied to the FBI about those contacts. And then if you jump ahead, January 2017, President-elect Trump, he hasn't taken office yet, James Comey, briefed him on this Steele dossier, even though it was salacious and unverified. So more missing pieces of how this got started and how it got brought to
And we
President.
also know that the meeting that President Trump had to be briefed on this unverified dossier that was essentially a Democrat propaganda piece or opposition research was also then leaked to the media as well. That meeting was leaked to the media.
Right.
So why was it leaked to the media, and why was he ever briefed on this in the first place if it was unverified and they didn't know if any of the information was true?
I have lots of questions about just Yahoo News and these organizations. Catherine, you termed it this way, and I took notes on what you said earlier.
I like it when you take notes. I appreciate that.
We all handle your business like a boss. Everybody's taking notes on you.
I can.
So what you said earlier was that it would appear, from what you had seen, and now we all can see, Fusion GPS, the firm that put together that anti-Trump dossier through this British spy, Christopher Steele, was putting forth some sort of active campaign to brief media outlets. Do you think the media outlets, and this is really important, knew that they were part of a narrative or campaign? Were they just getting the information? And again, I don't know if we can get that from here, but Yahoo News is mentioned a couple of times, and I'm just wondering, did they know that they were part of this circular reporting?
Well, we'll have to seek out comment from Michael Isikoff and Yahoo News
we
about
will.
what they knew at that time. Circular reporting maybe sounds like a complicated term. Maybe I can just break it down a little bit more for people. When you're acting as a journalist and you get information, you have to understand the quality of the source. And you want to understand whether this is an independent source or whether information you're getting from a second source is connected, okay? So in its simplest terms here, what you have is information about the dossier appeared to be coming from not only Steele, but also American media reports. So it looked like two separate sources, but in fact, it was really the same source. Because the source was Fusion GPS.
We should emphasize, and you know this, that a number of news organizations who had access to this dossier or the contents didn't report them. CNN reported on the existence of the dossier, didn't publish it. It was only BuzzFeed that actually put it out there while acknowledging,
that's a great point,
not knowing whether it was true or not. But, you know, I do want to remind people that this is a memo prepared by the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Is it possible that the FBI or the Democrats will say, well, the Steele dossier, now that we know about his motivations and his deceptions, was just one of the elements used to rely in that national security court in order to get those.
Well, wait, I have an answer to that. If you look down at the bottom of point 4, it says Deputy Director McCabe testified before the committee in December 2017 that no surveillance warrant would have been sought from the FISA court without the Steele dossier information.
But does that mean that they hadn't, because I had always understood it that the Steele dossier played a role in this, but that they had also gotten additional sourcing to corroborate elements of the Steele dossier.
He testified before the committee.
Part that Catherine has pointed out from this memo was that sort of sourcing, if you will, that circular sourcing, all went back to the same place. I mean, it wasn't actually 2 or 3. Go ahead, Catherine.
Let me just read from this section here. It states the Carter Page surveillance warrant, the application for it incorrectly assesses that Steele did not directly provide information to Yahoo News. Steele has admitted in British court filings, we've been following this with our investigative team, Pamela Brown and Sid Upson, the defamation suit in the British courts, that Steele met with Yahoo News and several other outlets in September of 2016 at the direction of Fusion GPS. Okay, so
Catherine,
you remember that, just one more thing. Remember that Senator Grassley and Senator Graham sent a referral to the Justice Department on the basis that they felt that Steele had provided, had lied to federal investigators, right? A violation of 18 U.S.C. 1001. And this Republican drafted staff memo in the House lays out an argument that Steele lied about his media contacts to the FBI, and that he was then terminated, or his contact was cut off because of those media contacts.
Catherine, there's been a remarkable battle this week here where you are in Washington over whether this should be released, whether Devin Nunes should release this memo. And the argument that even the director of the FBI, President Trump's appointee, Christopher Wray, made was it would reveal or compromise classified sources and methods. In reading this quickly, nothing jumps out at me as revealing that. I wonder if you, with your experience, see anything that you can understand why this argument would have been made so vociferously.
I think we all know how, in its very basic framework, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court works and how they get FISA warrants. I think what this lays out, which may have made people somewhat uncomfortable, is that it gives you a sense of what that process is, what the application, the granting, who's involved in that process. But I can't really point to a source or a method that is revealed in this case.
Nor can I.
Not yet, at least.
Catherine,
Yeah.
Can I ask you, because I'm now we're all the way through this. We're at point 5, which is on the last page here, and it talks about George Papadopoulos, the
right.
former Trump campaign advisor, George Papadopoulos, one of the people who has pleaded guilty to some charges here in the investigation, not having anything to do with collusion or coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russian officials, as are alleged. But I'm curious to the point that you see for mentioning this, for talking about Peter Strzok. Where is this going in this section of the memo?
Well, this section of the memo, based on my experience, is trying to make the argument that once they secured a surveillance warrant for this one-time Trump campaign aide, Carter Page, this became a building block for at least one other counterintelligence investigation, and that was on another Trump campaign aide, George Papadopoulos. George Papadopoulos is important because he pled guilty to lying to the FBI and is now considered a cooperating witness. So this section of the memo, if you will, seeds the idea that elements of the special counsel investigation are touched in some way or maybe even tainted because the surveillance warrants were not obtained with a strong foundation, and the Carter Page warrant then led, like a domino effect, to the opening of another investigation into someone connected to the Trump campaign. You remember that we've had two indictments: Paul Manafort, the former campaign chairman, and then also his business partner, Rick Gates. And then we've had 2 deals, Mike Flynn and George Papadopoulos.
All right, Catherine, we're going to give you a chance to step back and continue your excellent look at this and reporting today.
Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. We will come back to you for
you.
certain. Thank you so much. You know, I do want to point out, because I know our team out here brought us, because you and I were frantically, Melissa, trying to get that PDF open.
I could do it.
We got it. I
got it open, but I couldn't read it.
So the point I was going to make, which I think is interesting, Howard, when you read through, we have a copy of the White House letter. When you read through, I mean, it's a page and a half almost. It's a third the length of this document. And it's interesting to me because it lays out where the president was kind of coming from in his counsel. And that's part of the story, too.
Well, when President Trump repeatedly says that the whole special counsel investigation is a witch hunt and that he believes, in fact, he just said today, the Justice Department has been biased in favor of Democrats and against Republicans, a lot of people would take issue with that. But you can start to see his worldview here, because you look at this White House memo and it talks about who got involved in approving these FISA warrants, these national security warrants, to essentially spy on and surveil people like his associate Carter Page. Jim Comey, who, of course, the president has fired. Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who
just got fired.
Forced out as the number 2.
Well, Don Jr. actually tweeted that he got fired.
Doesn't it kind of seem like a witch hunt?
He certainly resigned under pressure at the very least. Also, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, the man who appointed Mueller as special counsel, who some are saying perhaps the president would like to see him go. So it is, you know, there's certainly another side to this, but if you want to look at why the president is so convinced that all the roots of this investigation are partisan, this memo discredits Christopher Steele, somebody who despised Trump and wanted to block his election, and it also has several of these officials signing this warrant. Maybe they didn't realize the full import of how this was compromised information from a Democratic-hired Oppo firm and from this British spy.
But I think the president feels that way because it's becoming increasingly clearer that it is. that it has been all poisoned by politics. I mean, maybe things change on it, every day around here, it seems. But it's ultimately the clearer picture that we're seeing here, that there does seem...
was a Republican. He was a Republican appointee
I don't
to run the
care.
FBI.
There's been plenty of never-Trumpers that hate President Trump as well. Right. But you made the point earlier, Howie, in the sense that everyone involved that has gotten in trouble with Team Trump so far has nothing to do with Russia collusion. You made the point earlier that the original...
Mike Flynn has nothing to do with Russia collusion.
Would his conversation with the Russian ambassador have ever been a big deal if we hadn't been talking about Russia the entire time?
He lied to the FBI and he lied to Vice President Mike Pence.
I understand that, but the entire reason he was asked about his conversation was because of the narrative around Russia. He had a conversation with the Russian ambassador.